morning, class. Today we're going to talk about mitigation and adaptation. How many of you have heard the terms mitigation and adaptation already? Nobody has heard those terms? By a show of hands, who has heard the term mitigation and adaptation already? A few people? I'm sure that it was mentioned in the previous lessons, right? Those terms. I want you to do me a favor and, as to the best of your knowledge, on this sheet of paper that says Kia's story, can you turn it around and can you write what you feel or know the definition of mitigation is and what the definition of adaptation is? So to your best knowledge, what is mitigation and what is adaptation? To the best of your knowledge, even if it's a simple guess. Okay, time is up. All right, now I need you to just hold those definitions. We're going to come back to them later on in the lesson, and you're going to see how accurate you were or if you need to make any changes to those definitions, right? Now, as we progress in the lesson, I need someone to clearly identify what this photo is saying. What do you see on this photo? What does it look like to you? The obvious answer is what, Erwin? It's countries. Southern Arabian countries, okay. We know that it's a map, but a map of what? When we think about continents, which continent would this be? It is a part of Asia, right? It is a part of Asia, right? We're familiar with Asia, right? Okay, so it's a part of Asia. And today we're going to key in on a particular area called Bangladesh. Can you say Bangladesh? Has anybody heard of Bangladesh before? You have, Edwin? Can you share something you've heard about it?
I've seen many clothes with mark made in Bangladesh.
Oh, you've seen clothes that says made in Bangladesh? Okay, excellent. Perhaps it was mentioned in movies or so, you know. So it's a very popular area, and we're going to learn some more about Bangladesh today. Bangladesh is one of the countries most severely affected by climate change. 49% of the population live in chronic or moderate poverty, and almost 80% of the population live in rural areas. Climate change takes the form of both increasingly severe and frequent weather events and less predictable growing seasons. Both threaten the resilience and livelihoods of poor people and push them further into poverty. Right? And this is a photograph of an early morning on the Padma River in Bangladesh. Now this river is important because Erwin is going to share a little story about someone in reference to the river. Go ahead, Erwin.
Last summer, I noticed a big increase in the temperature during July and August. It was much hotter than usual, and I found it very difficult to do everyday things. Despite spending several summers in Bangladesh and coping well, my aunt lives near the Padma River, and there is more river erosion than ever, where people are losing their homes as large chunks of land breaks away into the river. I think people in power, such as world leaders, need to act quickly to try and put strategies in place to deal with climate change. Many people who are well off and live in developed countries don't notice the changes as much. But this is a global issue, so everybody should act.
Okay. So that is Ruba's testimony, and Ruba lives in Bangladesh. What are some of the things that she recognizes that is happening around her? What did she share with us just now? Yes, Stephen.
For her in the summer, she noticed a big increase in temperature in July and July to August.
Okay, so the weather probably gets hotter, yes. Anything else? Yes, Edwin?
There's being erosion along the riverside where she on the Panma River
Uh-huh.
where she usually goes.
So there are a lot of erosion taking place along the riverside. People are losing their homes, exactly. Do you see some of these things happening in our country, Belize? Do you feel that perhaps it gets hotter in the months of July and August? Or does it get colder? Do you feel that it's getting hotter as we progress, as you get older? What about erosions along our river and our seawall? Do you see erosion taking place in Belize? Yes, Elson.
Like in Banana Bank a few years ago, there was a lot of erosion happening along the rivers, and a lot of people lost their homes.
Okay. Did you see any changes made? You said a while ago.
Any changes? They've planted a lot of trees to hold the soil together.
Okay, excellent. Anyone else? Do you see any other types of erosion taking place in our country? Has anybody been to Monkey River before? Yes, Kyle? Have you seen erosion taking place there? Can you explain?
Mainly on the on the edge of the river, where the soil is eroding.
Okay, the soil is eroding. I know that Monkey River has lost a large portion of its beach, and they're trying to do some reclamation of it as we speak. So Ruba's testimony can somewhat be similar to what we are also experiencing here in our country, Belize. Now I have another testimony that we'd like to share, and we're going to share a video with you. This video will be shown twice. The reason being, the first time you look at this video, I need you to clearly listen for the impact flooding is having on Kia, her family, and the community. So I need you to listen to the information that she's presented. After you watch the first show, you're going to record a list of those impacts that you've heard. We're going to watch it a second time, and then you're going to listen then for how Kia's community is adapting to climate change. Do I need to repeat the instructions? So it's going to be shown twice, and now you're going to listen to hear the impact flooding is having on Kia, her family, and her community. So listen carefully.
My name is Kea. My home is on Char Atra. I'm 11 years old.
In recent years, Kea's home has flooded much more often. Her family of 6 is forced to spend weeks perched on wooden planks inches above the water.
During the flood, it didn't feel nice to stay on a raised platform. Crockery, eating, everything else is done here. Cooking everything is to take place here. We bathed in nasty water. At that time, we stayed on the wooden boards for 1 month.
The raised planks mean they can just about survive, but being surrounded by floodwater for so long isn't easy.
During the flood, it was difficult for us. We couldn't always go to school. We couldn't play. We had to swim to school. There was a lot of water. I had a fever. My brother had diarrhea.
Violent currents caused the river to break its banks, washing away homes and farmland.
At that time, our house was over in another village. The river came very slowly and flooded it. Our old house is in the center of the river now. I didn't like it at that time. The waves and currents are scary. There were so many waves. We used to play over there, but now I don't get to play as much here. Over there I had my friends. Now I don't have those friends. They have all moved to other places.
Oxfam works with local experts to support Kaya's family, giving them potentially life-saving training and keeping them safe and healthy during a flood. Kaya has already seen the destructive impact of climate change, but she still has dreams and hopes to be a doctor when she grows up.
I want to treat the poor and needy and stand next to them during their sorrow, support them in their time of danger.
Now, in your pairs and your groups, I'd like you to record some of the things that Kia, her family, and her community experienced through the impact of flooding. What did they experience? So I'd like you to jot down 3 points. What are some of the things that they had to endure, go through, while they were experiencing flooding in their community? So you've just recorded some of the impacts of flooding that Kia, her family, and her community experienced. We're going to watch the video once more. And now I want you to try and identify what were some of the adaptation measures that they had to put in place. So because of the flooding, what were some of the things that they had to do to ensure that they were going to stay alive, right, or even get to school? So listen carefully and try to remember. You're not going to write while we're watching the video. You're going to record after. And just try to recall some of the stuff that she's sharing in response to how they adapted to the experience of having a flood.
My name is Kea. My home is on Char Akra. I'm 11 years old.
In recent years, Kaya's home has flooded much more often. Her family of 6 is forced to spend weeks perched on wooden planks inches above the water.
During the flood, it didn't feel nice to stay on a raised platform. Crockery, eating, everything else was done here. Cooking everything is to take place here. We bathed in nasty water. At that time, we stayed on the wooden boards for 1 month.
The raised planks mean they can just about survive, but being surrounded by floodwater for so long isn't easy.
During the flood, it was difficult for us. We couldn't always go to school. We couldn't play. We had to swim to school. There was a lot of water. I had a fever. My brother had diarrhea.
Violent currents caused the river to break its banks, washing away homes and farmland.
At that time, our house was over in another village. The river came very slowly and flooded it. Our old house is in the center of the river now. I didn't like it at that time. The waves and currents are scary. There were so many waves. We used to play over there, but now I don't get to play as much here. Over there I had my friends. Now I don't have those friends. They have all moved to other places.
Oxfam works with local experts to support Kaya's family, giving them potentially life-saving training and keeping them safe and healthy during a flood. Kaya has already seen the destructive impact of climate change, but she still has dreams and hopes to be a doctor when she grows up.
I want to treat the poor and needy and stand next to them during their sorrow, support them in their time of danger.
Now in your pairs or groups, I'd like you to record what are some of the adaptation measures that Kia, her family, and her community had to undertake so as to survive the flood. Okay, time is up. Put down your pen. Now let's begin to share. All right, my first question was, what are the impacts of flooding that Kia, her family, and her community had to endure? What are some of the experiences that they had to go through? Yes, Erwin.
The impacts, they had diarrhea and other illnesses. They couldn't go to school and they couldn't go outside to play because where they used to play was now flooded.
Okay, so they had diarrhea. They couldn't go to school and they couldn't play outside because the area was flooded. Kyle.
A lot of people were separated and migrated to other places because of the flood.
Okay, so some of the families were separated and some of them had to move due to the flood. Yes, Stephen?
Some of them used to bathe with dirty waters.
Some of them had to bathe with dirty water. Yes?
They lose their homes and crops.
They lost their homes and they lost crops. Elston, anything else to add?
They didn't have proper drinking water.
They didn't have proper drinking water. Excellent. So some of you mentioned some very good points. So they had to also raise the platforms that they were living on. They called them planks, right? They said that they had to raise them about 6 inches so that they didn't have to sleep in the water. They had to wash and bathe in dirty water. They were unable to go to school, and when they did go to school, they had to swim. They were unable to play. They got sick. Kia said that she had fever and her little brother had diarrhea. They were unable to play or see their friends, and they felt isolated. And a lot of their friends had to move away. Right? So those are some of the experiences that she had to endure and her family because of a flood. So my next question is, all of this that occurred during the flood, how did they make the situation better? How were they able to survive the flood? And I'd like to hear from some people who have not been sharing. What about my girls in the back? Yes?
They have to build their homes in highlands and used to sleep in high beds.
Okay, so they had to adjust to the lifestyle, right? So some of them had to move away and build their homes in higher areas. Or if they had to stay there and didn't have anywhere to go, they just had to raise their homes. Anyone else? Yes, Edwin.
Her father started showing the family different methods to stay alive and to learn to adapt to the situation that they were.
Okay, so they learned survival skills, right? If you can recall in the video that even when they cooked and when they stored their pottery, they had to store it on these high shelves. Anyone else? Yes, Erwin.
Some didn't adapt, some just moved away.
Some just moved away, but it's also a form of adaptation, right? So that not to have to experience that flood again, that they got smart and said that we will move to higher grounds if they cannot avoid the natural disaster. So we heard then that some of the things that they did for adaptation were building raised platforms inside their houses. So they had to raise everything inside their houses. They also helped with staying safe and healthy. I'm sure that they protected each other. some of them moved away, right? And they were able to survive. So these are some of the experiences that these people had. Has any flooding occurred in our country before? Yes? All right. I also experienced a flood as I live in Belize City, and my work is right near the seaside, and we have an office there, and when we returned the following day, it was like 4 feet of water inside of the building, right? So all the papers and so that were on the ground got destroyed. Even our church, our cathedral, a lot of the furniture got destroyed because it was under 4 feet of water, right? And we had to move a lot of the equipment that we had, computers and so forth, and put it higher so that it didn't get destroyed. So floods can be a very disastrous experience. And as we move on, we're going to find out or come up with some solutions as how we can adapt to these kinds of situations, because as things are getting worse in relation to climate change, we cannot as human beings control all these natural disasters. So what then can we do if we can't control them? Right? We have to try and adapt and find the best way to cope with those situations when they arise. Now you have some colored strips in front of you. Can you identify them, please? And you're going to solve a mystery for me, right? And it is called Runa's mystery. And that will suggest, or have you answered the question, why did Runa's stall close down? Now, Runa sells fruits and vegetables to travelers driving in and out of a place called Cox Bazar, right? And I need you to take your colored strips and you're going to lay them out in front of you, and you're going to try and put the sentences in sequential order. You might not get all of them in perfect order, but you're going to read them and try to determine the answer to the question. Why did Runa had to close down her stall? Right? What are some of the factors that pushed her to close down her stall? So kindly, in your pairs or in your groups, take the strips of papers, put them in front of you, and try to sort them out. Come up with the answer to why did Runa close down her stall. Strip them off and just put them in front of you, and then you sort them out. And you can read them together in pairs. Okay, all of you are pink, so I need you to put all of them in the front here, and then you sort them out, because they are not different stories. You will not get perfect sequential order, but by reading all of them, you'll be able to determine or come up with the answer to why Runa had to close down her stall. Okay, time is up. Let's listen to what Glenda has to share. Glenda, let's hear your sequential order.
Bangladesh is in South Asia. It is one of the 10 countries most at risk for sea level rising. Cox's Bazar is a resort on the southeastern coast of Bangladesh. Tourists come to Cox's Bazar for the sandy beaches. Runa sells fruit and vegetables to travelers and trucks traveling in and out of Cox's Bazar. Runa's stall is on a main road leading in Cox's Bazar. The road is less than 0.5 millimeter above sea level. Last week, Runa's stall was flooded for the second time. Runa's stall has had to close down. Last year, harvest was spoiled by the heavy rain. Recent storm weather had made it hard for cars and trucks to come in Cox's Bazar. Bad storm and rain had been damaging the road leading into Cox's Bazar. Sea level had risen as a result of global warming. Shavraz is driven to school each day in his parents' car. Shavraz lived 2 kilometers from his school in Bethnal Green, East London. Shavraz's parents say the traffic in Bethnal Green makes it too dangerous for him to walk or cycle to school. The morning bus to Shavraz's school is often held up in a heavy traffic. East London's traffic is mostly made up of cars. The Mayor of London is responsible for developing plans and policies for improving transport and air quality in London. Cars produce carbon dioxide from the burning of petroleum. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas which adds to global warming. Global warming is believed to cause extra weather.
Okay, thank you very much. And that was a good attempt at putting those in sequential order. Now my next question is, what caused her stall to close down? Why was she forced to close her stall? Yes, Chrisia?
Because of flood.
Because of flood. Excellent answer. Yes, Erwin?
Because of the weather and the loss of crops.
Okay, because of the weather and the loss of crops. Remember that she sells fruits and vegetables. Anyone else? So we have flooding, we have the weather, we have loss of crops. Anything else?
She has no customers.
So because of the flooding, that would also mean that even if she has crops to sell, she wouldn't have any customers to buy them, right? So that is one of the reasons why she had to close down her stall. Now if you notice on your cards, you have almost 2 different stories occurring, right? You have the story of Runa, and then you also have the story of whom? Shatraz. So what I need you to do now is to categorize both of those stories, because one of them is taking place in Cox's Bazar while the other is taking place in the United Kingdom in London. So categorize those cards for me. Some of you have them in 2 categories already. So some of you might not have them that way. So I want you to put all of Runa's information together, and I want you to put all of Shatra's information together. And you have 2 minutes to do that. All the strips that relate to Runa, you put them in one category, and all the strips that relate to Shatraz, you put in a second category. Okay, most of us have completed. Now you have some strips, some white strips in front of you. And these strips are called solution strips. Now you're going to decide which solution to the impact of climate change should take place in Bangladesh, which is where Cox's Bazar is located. and which solution should take place in the United Kingdom where Shatra's location is. Right? So there are several solutions to their problems. The solutions to problems that Runa is currently experiencing and solutions to problems that Shatraz is experiencing at this moment. So kindly take off your solution strips and match them with those cards. You can share the workload in half and match solutions. You're not going to match each solution per strip. You're going to match the solutions by category. If you notice, one of your strips of paper says solutions for the UK, and one of your strips of paper says solutions for Bangladesh. And time. Irma, what kind of situation does Runa has? What's going on with Runa? Runa had to close down her stall, am I right?
Yes, miss.
Why did she have to close down her stall?
Because of the flood.
Because there was flooding, yes. Anything else?
No, miss.
Okay, so there was flooding. She had to close it down because there was flooding. She lost crops and she also lost customers. And Runa lives in a part of Bangladesh called Cox's Bazar. Now, what are some solutions to Runa's problem? How can we help Runa? Please share.
The UN's farming experts should use adaptation funding to help Bangladesh farmers to grow rain tolerant food and vegetables.
Okay, next one, a little bit louder please.
A microfinance bank support by adaptation funding should lead people affected by climate change a small amount of money to start a new business.
Okay, microfinance. Evelyn, do we have any other solutions to share?
The United Kingdom should should think about other smaller countries that are being affected by the things that they do, like using so many cars that burn petrol and different fossil fuels. So they should think about new innovations that could help smaller countries so that they don't get affected so much by them.
So they can help out smaller countries. Anything else?
The United Nations farming experts should teach or help small countries who are just learning different techniques for growing plants. They should help them to grow plants which are rain tolerant and do not get destroyed by flooding or rain.
Okay, so they can assist by teaching or educating the people of Bangladesh how to grow plants that are rain tolerant, so plants that can survive through flooding and so forth. And they can also assist these smaller countries by maybe giving them aid, whether it's financial or kind, right, whenever they have times of disaster. What about Shatra's situation? Yes, Elston.
Shafra's problem is the amount of traffic in her area.
Okay, there's a lot of traffic in his area. What else?
That it produces a lot of CO2, a lot of carbon gases.
Okay.
Which.
So a lot of, and how does that affect him?
Well, it
personally,
it contributes to the global warming. And it creates a lot of weather and things. But then it is affecting him because then he cannot get where he wants to get to.
Okay, so he cannot move about freely how he would like to move. Okay, right? Even when he takes the bus, there's heavy traffic and sometimes he would get late and so forth. What are some solutions to Shatra's problems? How can we solve his problem? Kyle, what can we tell the UK?
You should tell the UK to help in more transportation to help people to get places to where they want to.
Okay, you have some solution cards in front of you for the UK. Can you share some of them, please?
Young people in the UK should join a campaign teaching people in the UK how to reduce their carbon emissions.
Okay, so they can have a campaign educating people how to reduce carbon emissions. Yes?
UK government should provide subsidies or discounts for families who buy an electricity car.
Okay, who buy electric cars, so they can offer discounts to make it cheaper so that we don't have carbon emission through fuel. Yes, Irma?
The UK government should introduce a tax on the fuel used for shipping. Airplane fuel is taxed, but shipping fuel isn't. This would raise money which could be used for climate adaptation.
Okay, so they can raise monies by adding a tax to different types of fuels, right? One more, Erwin.
Local councils should build bus and cycle lanes so cars don't always have the priority.
Okay, so they should build cars, they should build cycles, lanes for cyclists, and they should build lanes for buses so that the cars don't have the priorities. So what then is adaptation and what then is mitigation? Turn over your leaflets to the definition that you first wrote at the beginning of the class. Now let's look at the definition of mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is actions to slow down the process of climate change by reducing carbon emissions, mainly takes place in wealthy countries. So mitigation would be the reduction of carbon emission in wealthy countries. This tackles the causes of climate change. Remember, all the cars and the petrol that they're using causes more carbon emission, and we have more carbon being released into the atmosphere. What did we say would happen when more carbon is released into the atmosphere and we don't have enough sources to store the carbon? We had this about 2 lessons ago. If there is more, remember the carbon cycle? If there is more carbon going up into the atmosphere and we don't have enough, and that's what we call our carbon sinks, and we don't have enough carbon storage to store it, what happens to the atmosphere with all the carbon in there? There's an imbalance and there is a rise in temperature. And that rise in temperature is called global warming, right? So we have countries who are mainly wealthy countries who need to address mitigation because they have to reduce the amount of carbon that they are putting into the atmosphere. And then we have countries that fall in another category, and these are poor countries, and their actions are to help people to better manage the effects of climate change. So it tackles its effects on societies and the environment, and this happens in poor countries. So mitigation refers to what wealthy countries will do to reduce carbon, the carbon emission. And adaptation refers to what poor countries will do to try and best survive what is occurring to them. So, which country, the UK or Bangladesh, would have to mitigate? Why would the UK have to mitigate? Erwin?
Because they're better off in economy than Bangladesh.
They're better off, but they are doing something in particular. They are releasing more carbon into the atmosphere. Yes, Edwin?
The UK are actually one of the sources or one of the reasons why Bangladesh is in this problem. So the UK is the one who actually have to mitigate in order to do some changes so that Bangladesh doesn't have to do so much adaptation.
Yes, right? So they're wealthy, and because they're wealthy, they can afford more of the luxuries in life. So they will have more cars and more buses that are going to emit carbon into the atmosphere, as opposed to Bangladesh, who maybe ride more bicycles and can only afford motorcycles. They have a lot of issues with sea level rise, and they will experience more flooding, and they won't be able to address the issues because they are a poor country. And so then, if the UK has to mitigate, what does Bangladesh have to do? They would have to adapt, right? So these are two ways of addressing the climate change issue, right? That some countries in the world will have to mitigate, mean that they're going to have to develop a conscience and reduce the amount of carbon they put into the atmosphere. And that would be Shatra's community, because Shatra's is complaining about all the traffic and all the carbon that is going on in the atmosphere, and he can't even move around. The buses and the cars are in the way. As opposed to Runa and Kia, who are suffering because of the natural disasters caused by global warming, caused by the increase in temperature, caused by the increase in carbon that we're putting in the atmosphere. So are we clear about what mitigation and adaptation is? So who wants to explain? That's like who wants to be a billionaire question, right? Who wants to explain? Erwin.
Mitigation is what bigger countries or first world countries undertake when they are releasing a lot of gases, and adaptation is what third world countries take to adapt to the climate around them.
Okay, right? So one has to develop conscience and say, you know what, we're going to reduce what we're doing. We're going to stop what we're doing and how we affect other countries. And we have the more poor countries, which are like in Africa, the small islands, even in the Caribbean here, Belize. We have to adapt to sea level rise. As you see, each year we have more natural disasters. We have felt incidents of more earthquakes. We have had experience with more flooding. We have had more experience with hurricanes. So, and we have to adapt as a country. While these wealthy countries might not be experiencing all those natural disasters, they might actually be the cause of it, because they're putting so much carbon in the atmosphere. Now we move on to food for thought then. What should be the balance between mitigation and adaptation? Is there a balance? Remember, these are two ways to address the climate change issue. What is the balance? Yes, Edwin.
The balance is there should be more mitigation, but most likely it won't fix the situation overnight, so it will take a longer period. Adaptation, well, you have to you have to wait until that mitigation has actually done some help. So you have to also wait long for the mitigation to work.
Okay, very good. Now, to strike a balance between mitigation and adaptation, it would then mean that all these countries that are putting out carbon into the atmosphere, the wealthy countries, they will have to assist the poor countries financially, because the poor countries are suffering the consequences. The poor countries are getting more floods, more flash floods. They're getting tsunamis. They're experiencing hurricanes and earthquakes and so forth. And these people are already poor. So they're asking the wealthy countries who are putting out this carbon into the atmosphere to assist the poor countries financially to try and strike a balance. So where should the money come from? The wealthy countries. Very good. But how would they get the money? People have made several suggestions. 2 years ago, there was a conference called COP, and this conference was in Cancun, and there was a decision made that each year these wealthy countries, and these wealthy countries are the European states, we have some Australia, Greenland, Switzerland, Canada, all of those countries, USA, that each year they are supposed to put $100 billion in the bank to assist the poorer countries with adaptation. Has that been done? No. Since last year they checked, there was no money in the bank, absolutely no money. The wealthy countries said, well, where are we going to get this money from? So someone came up with the idea that they're going to do something what we call a Robin Hood tax. How many people have heard of Robin Hood? Elston, Kyle, Edwin, girls, you've never heard of Robin Hood? Men in Tights? You've never seen the movie Robin Hood, Men in Tights? No? You've never read the story? Okay then, well, you need to pick up that story or watch that movie. Preferably read the story. What is the purpose of Robin Hood? Who was Robin Hood? Yes, Erwin.
He was, well, they say he was a person who stole from the rich to give to the poor.
He stole from the rich to give to the poor. And that is the reason why they call that solution the Robin Hood tax. Because you are going to take money from the wealthy countries to assist the poor countries. And you are going to do that through taxation. You are going to tax some of their purchases, to tax their stocks and their bonds and all the extra money that they had in their banks around the world. And those taxes would then go into a separate account to assist countries who are poor when they have to experience natural disasters, right? And take up the tax on fuel. If you take up the tax on fuel, it means that you're going to purchase less cars, or cars that use fuel, because now we have electric and solar cars. So it means then that you would take up the cost of fuel and people will not want to buy cars anymore. It's going to be too expensive, right? So those were some of the suggestions made. Taking in all of that you just learned in reference to mitigation and adaptation, I need you to create a postcard. How many people have created a postcard before? Nobody has created a postcard before? Has anybody sent a postcard to anyone before? Has anyone seen a postcard before? All right, that's better. Okay, now you're going to create a postcard and you're going to send it to a member of parliament in the United Kingdom. And you're going to look at that person and say, hey man, these are 2 things that you can do as a rich country to assist poor Bangladesh. Right? So you're going to come up with 2 solutions and you're going to share those solutions with a member of parliament in the UK as how to assist Bangladesh with adaptation. Any questions? You're going to do this in pairs. Yes, Edwin? You can write them right on the lines. On this section, you can draw a little photograph, a little scribble, if you like. And you create your names of the person in parliament. You can all write to Miss Michelle Elliott, Member of Parliament in the United Kingdom, if you like. Or you create your own person, right? So in your pairs or groups, quickly come up with 2 solutions that you're going to share with the UK. You're going to tell the UK how they can help Bangladesh. What can they do to help Bangladesh? And you have 3 minutes to do this. And time is up. Can I have 2 volunteers share their solution? 1 solution per person that you would suggest to a member of parliament in the UK. And let's begin with you, Kyle.
Anna Aikal, UK Parliament, PO Box 1997. Right. Donate finances and help rebuild houses.
Okay, so you would suggest that they donate finances to Bangladesh and to help rebuild houses that were probably lost in the flood. Anyone else? Can I have a female sharing? Yes, Daisy.
I suggest that you provide food and personal needs to Bangladesh.
Okay, and who is your member of parliament?
Mr. Wilshire.
Mr. Wilshire. Okay, thank you very much. So you have your solutions. After the lesson, you're going to have a little time to do a little drawing on those postcards, and then we're going to post them on our wall. Right? Now, to wrap up our lesson, let's review some of the main concepts. We talked about mitigation. What is mitigation?
Mitigation is when first world countries try to stop the release of gases, well, at least by a little, so that the other countries can adapt.
Okay. Instead of using the term first world countries, what's another term that we can use? Developed, and I use that term that begins with W, wealthy countries, right? So mitigation refers to how these wealthy countries can reduce the amount of carbon emission. What are some of the things that they will do? If no action is taken to reduce emission, the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere could double by 2035. Some of you might still be alive. Such a radical change could lead to major changes where people live and how they live their lives. It is necessary, mitigation is necessary as a means to avoid the changes in climate. Adaptation. We know we discussed what mitigation was. What then is adaptation? We said mitigation refers to what wealthy countries can do to reduce the carbon emission. What then is adaptation? Do any of my girls have a response? Yes, Yadira.
Adaptation are actions to help people better manage the effects on society and the environment.
Okay, so they're actions that help people to manage the effects of society and the environment. Would these countries who have to adapt, would these countries be wealthy, Yadira? They are the more poor countries because they're the ones that are experiencing the effects of climate change. So then, when we talk about mitigation, what are some of the things globally that we can do? Use of low or no carbon energy sources. So we now have solar panels, we now have electric cars. Some people don't have to use cars anymore that use petrol. We can ride our bicycles more often. We can walk more often. Increased energy saving and efficiency of energy use. How many people are guilty of saving energy? Erwin, Elston, Kyle. So everybody else forgets to take off the light when they leave the room. Right? I'm guilty sometimes and I have to remember. I keep having to remind my children, take off the light when you leave the room. If you're not using your computer, you put it on sleep or you take it off, right? So there are different ways that we can save energy and save water. Carbon capture and storage and extension of carbon sinks. If we have more carbon going up into the atmosphere, to create a balance, we will need to have more storage for the carbon. So we have to ensure that we protect our forests, we protect our ecosystem, and we protect our wildlife. Low carbon lifestyles and consumption choices. So we have to change our lifestyles. We have to change the way we live. Stop using a lot of hairspray that emits carbon into the atmosphere. Reduce how many times we use the car. Some people have a shop around the corner, and instead of walking around the corner or going on a bicycle around the corner, they would get in the car just to drive 1 minute around the corner, right? So by just walking or riding a bicycle, we can stop the use of, we can stop carbon emitting into the atmosphere. Adaptation options. Some of the natural changes that occur with adaptation are the changes in length of growing seasons, so the way that our crops grow, right? How many people have noticed a change in mango this year? Did we have a lot of mangoes this year? And I don't mean if you sat and ate 16 mangoes. I mean a lot of mangoes blossoming. Did we have a lot of, as opposed to last year? What happened, Elston?
Yes, I noticed that it's scarce now, like for this mango season, and I had like 2 mango, to tell you the truth, and last year I had so much.
Last year we could have made mango juice, and we could have frozen mangoes, and we could have done all sorts of things with mangoes. And this year, if you got to eat one delicious mango, you were fortunate, right? So you'll notice that there are changes in the way that our crops are growing, right? Changes in ecosystems, right? I can recall my children going to bathe at what we call the Belizean beach, and something that rarely happened was that there was a lot of stingrays, no jellyfish in the beach area. And that is something that doesn't usually occur, right? And when we looked it up, it says that because of the warming that it's occurring, the jellyfish are coming more closer into land, right? So there's changes in our ecosystems. Wetland migration. You might find some crocodiles and alligators being in places that they don't belong, right? So you might have animals that are moving into human habitat because they're trying to find somewhere to survive. Humans, we might have to start to purchase more insurance. In Belize, we don't usually purchase insurance for our homes, but we might have to start now with the incidence of hurricanes and even now earthquakes that are affecting the country. Constructions of houses on stilts. What do we mean by houses on stilts? Higher houses that are on piles, right? So instead of building bungalow houses, right, houses that are flat or maybe just 4 feet off the ground, we might have to start to build houses that are much taller and that are on stilts, so that when flooding occurs, we don't get affected as much. Redesign of oil rigs. So Belize, we're just getting into the oil industry, but all those other countries that produce a lot of oil, they have to find ways to redesign their oil rigs to match these new measures that will be put in place. Early warning systems. You know that different things are going to occur, different natural disasters, and so you can readily prepare yourself for it. You know hurricane season is coming up, you readily prepare yourself. New building codes. As a country, we are guilty of building the houses. I can sit in my room and look through my window into somebody else's room. The houses are very close together. They are not separated, right? Houses are built sometimes right on the street side. You walk off the highway onto somebody's front door, right? So building codes and so forth, and probably that you'll have to start to build more concrete houses instead of board houses, houses made of wood. So there has to be building codes to match the effects, to match the natural disasters so that we can better survive them. Incentives for relocation, that you can actually say to somebody in Belize City, you know what, Belize City is getting flooded too often. Why don't you go and move to Cayo where it's higher? But why would that person want to move to Cayo? Why would that person want to move to another location? You can offer maybe job opportunities in that area. You can offer them land. You can offer them financial supplements so that they can relocate. Remember that if a country does not do this, when the country is in crisis, when a poor country goes into natural disaster, it would then mean that the onus would have to be on the government to provide for these people who are in need. So those are some of the things that we can do. Those are some of the adaptation options, and those are some of our mitigation actions. Now I hope that you leave today clearly understanding what is mitigation and what is adaptation. How many people had an accurate definition at the beginning of the class when I asked you to write a definition of mitigation? You had an accurate definition. Excellent. How many people are going to be honest and say that, no, my definition was wrong? Wonderful. So now you have the accurate definition, and I hope that you won't forget it. Thank you very much for your participation, and I hope to see you finish your postcards so that we can post them on the wall. Thank you, class.